Hello, this is Ned Shapley with EPA's Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards. We'll be starting this webinar in the next few minutes. Thank you for joining us today. We're just going to allow a few more moments for folks in. Thanks again for joining. We still are seeing a number of participants starting to sign on, so we're going to give it about another 2 minutes before we start the webinar. Once again, thanks for joining us today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We thank you in advance for giving us your time this afternoon, and we hope today's presentation is informative. My name is Ned Shapley, and I am with EPA's Office of Air and Radiation. I'm here today with my colleague, Margaret McCauley from EPA's Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, and we are here to present the SuperMeter Program informational webinar. The SuperMeter Program is a jointly run effort by OER and OECA, with OER evaluating technology and certifying the third-party notifiers, and OECA developing and running the reporting system. Before we get started, I want to let you know that EPA will make these slides available, and we are also recording today's presentation. Both the slides and recorded webinar will be available on the third-party certification site. This page is being updated in the next week with more information, and we'll have a link to these documents as soon as possible. Please note that it may take us a week or so to make the slides available and a little bit longer to make the video of the webinar available. We have to ensure these documents are completely accessible and meet our Section 508 obligations. We are very excited to have over 1,000 people register for this webinar, and to allow for greater attendance, we've also included a live stream. If any of your colleagues are having trouble accessing this webinar via the Zoom, they may access the webinar at the link below, and we will also place this link in the chat. Next slide, please. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items that we want to discuss. Participants seeking language support, please look at the bottom of the page and identify the interpretation service. Please look for the interpretation icon, which looks like a globe, and click. If you do not see the interpretation icon, you may have to click the More button. When prompted to select your language under Listen In, either select English or Spanish channel. Next slide, please. Due to the number of participants in this webinar, we are unlikely to answer live questions during today's proceedings. However, we still encourage you to submit questions during the presentations. EPA will collect these and respond when appropriate. To submit a question, click on the Q&A icon and select Ask a Question button, and then type in your question in the pop-up text box window, and when done, please click Submit. To ensure that we're responding to the correct individual, please ensure that your Zoom screen name displays your full name and affiliation. To rename yourself, click on the Participants button located on the Zoom taskbar. Next, hover over your mouse over your name in the Zoom participants list. Click the rename button and enter the name you'd like to appear in the Zoom meeting, and then click OK. Next slide, please. As a reminder, today's webinar will be recorded and a closed captioning transcript has been enabled for the webinar. Please turn off your video and microphone, and if you experience video or sound issues, please try disconnecting and rejoining. Next slide, please. The final housekeeping is regarding Zoom etiquette. The US EPA is committed to facilitating productive dialogue in an environment of respect and safety. The agency will not tolerate harassment, discrimination, intimidation, inappropriate language or images, or the sustained disruption of this webinar. EPA expects all participants, including panelists, registered speakers, and presenters, to conduct themselves in a professional manner. US EPA will monitor and moderate this virtual event to ensure common standards of deficiencies are upheld. And with that, I'm going to go off camera and start the webinar. Next slide, please. Moving on to the webinar, we've broken up this webinar into 4 parts. The first part will discuss some background associated with the rule, technology being utilized in the SuperEmitter program, the third-party certification process, including requirements for certification, EPA's review process, and the revocation process for those third parties that provide materially false data to the EPA. The second part will focus on the SuperEmitter notifications, owner and operator responses, and the role that EPA plays in handling the data. The third part of this webinar will provide you a glimpse into how the SuperEmitter portal will function, including how reporting into the system will work. Finally, the fourth part, EPA will respond to several questions submitted in advance of the webinar. We are unable to respond to all the questions that we received. However, EPA will follow up with you if you submitted a question in advance of the webinar. To start, we're going to focus on EPA's new source performance standing and emission guidelines for existing sources in the oil and gas sector, which was promulgated on March 8th of this year. These rules included the new SuperEmitter program designed to provide accurate and actual information on large emission events to owners and operators so they can investigate the underlying causes of these emissions and, if necessary, mitigate these emissions. We recognize that many in this audience are interested in the relationship between the SuperEmitter program and Subpart W, or the WIC. However, this webinar will focus solely on the SuperEmitter program and the NSPS and EG rules. Next slide, please. The SuperEmitter program covers the same equipment and processes in the NSPS and emission guidelines rules. For crude oil, EPA focuses on operations from the well to the point of custody transfer at the refinery. The petroleum refineries are covered under a separate regulation. For natural gas, EPA's focus is on all operations from the well to the local distribution company custody transfer center, sometimes called the city gate. The SuperEmitter program covers upstream production and process equipments found at onshore well sites, storage tank batteries, gathering and boosting stations, and natural gas processing plants. In the natural gas and transmission and storage, the SuperEmitter program also includes equipment at compressor stations and storage tank batteries. The SuperEmitter program does not cover the distribution segment, which includes equipment beyond the city gate and other parts of distribution. Next slide, please. The SuperEmitter program in the NSPS and EG has EPA in a strong oversight role to ensure the program operates in a high degree of integrity, transparency, and accountability. The program is designed to leverage third-party expertise to find large leaks and releases of methane, known as superemitters. And for the purpose of this program, a superemitter is defined as an emission event of greater than 100 kilograms per hour of methane. To ensure the quality of the measurement, this program only uses EPA-approved remote sensing technology. And to guarantee the transparency of this program, all verified information provided to us by third parties, as well as the owner-operators regarding these large emissions, will be reported on a timely basis through a public-facing portal. Next slide, please. The foundation of the SuperEmitter program is having reliable detection technology for identifying these large emission events. EPA has developed a program for evaluating innovative methane detection technologies in the recent NSPS rulemaking that includes a requirement that all technology used in the SuperEmitter program for use will be approved for use by the EPA. This program is designed to evaluate the ability of a technology to detect methane emissions using a prescribed protocol, also known as a test method, for its operation. We are using the same evaluation steps for all methane detection technologies in this rule, from ground level sensors to satellite data retrieval. These evaluation steps focus on the technology provider providing EPA with a robust description of the technology and workflows they follow, a formal method of its operation, and a record for how the technology has been validated and as operated in the field. This program does not approve or certify the sensor making the measurement, and instead is very focused on how your protocol uses that measurement to determine the presence and how much methane is being emitted from a source. Next slide, please. EPA conducted a separate webinar in April of 2024 describing the process for submitting methane measurement technologies. A copy of that slide deck and video of that webinar can be found on our Advanced Methane Detection Technology website or is found in the links below. The webinar described the submission and review process, which included discussions for how to submit applications, what supporting information must be provided, and discussed the process and timing for EPA's technology review. In addition, EPA developed a plain language document that describes this process for submitting applications and is also found at the link below. It is important to understand that any alternative technologies used to detect methane in the NSPS rule, including the SuperEmitter program, must be submitted through EPA's electronic application portal that can be found at www.methane.app.cloud.gov in the link below. We also ask that technology providers that are interested in participating as a third party in the SuperEmitter program inform the EPA during the technology application process so that we can streamline their third-party certification. Next slide, please. This is a link, and once again, our website for submitting alternative methane detection technology. As technology providers submit their applications, these applications are accessible on the site for review. And as EPA approves these technologies, we will identify them site as approved, including its desired application. EPA has several submissions we are processing currently. To date, we have not received any technology under the SuperEmitter program. However, we expect to receive our first technology stand-up program within the coming months. Please check back to the site often to see the status of technology that can be utilized in this rule. Next link, please. The initial step in the SuperEmitter program is always to have an approved technology. The next element is to certify the third parties for evaluating and vetting data provided by those technology vendors. EPA has structured the third-party certification process as a program designed to quality assure the data being submitted to the EPA. The requirements of the third-party certification systems are in line with the quality assurance processes that EPA requires of its contractors when evaluating data for the agency. EPA has structured the third-party program to ensure quality data is provided. We are also interested in standard operating procedures for those third parties for how they're evaluating data, as well as how they're maintaining their records. We are also interested in the technology that is being used by the third parties, how personnel at the third party have been trained to understand data being provided by those technologies and their expertise in evaluating that data. Next slide, please. When a candidate third party is developing their application, they must submit the following information: general identification for the candidate third party organization, as well as the CV of the certifying officials, a description of the technologies used, including a reference to the technology approval, and any contracting agreements or memorandums of understanding with the technology provider. Most importantly, we want the third parties to develop a quality management plan, or QMP, describing the quality systems in place for managing data. Requirements for this program can be found in EPA's existing QMP standard for non-EPA organizations at the directive below. A link to this document is found on this page, which is also included in the regulatory language in the rule. Along with the QMP, we are interested in the standard operating procedures, or SOPs, that describe the data review process, as well as how the third party will store and manage records from third party surveys. We do not have a requirement for the format for SOPs. However, we've provided an example below on how those may be developed. Next slide, please. We recognize that some technology vendors may also choose to be certified third parties. In those instances, we could streamline the application process to avoid redundant submissions. In those circumstances, we would only ask the technology provider to provide us with a QMP, a data review SOP, if not already sufficiently detailed in their workflow associated with their technology application, and a data management SOP, if not already covered in their technology application. For those interested in being a third party using existing approved technology, you would need to provide us all the required elements as part of your submittal. Next slide, please. The next step is the internal EPA review, which consists of the measurement technology review, either conducted with an associated candidate third-party request or as a standalone submitted through our AltTech portal. The candidate third-party submission and review of any confidential business information, or CBI data, associated with the submission. Note, any proprietary information on part of the third party, such as an SOP, should be submitted through EPA's CBI office. And finally, EPA's review process. Next slide. As discussed earlier, any measurement technology associated with the submitted program must be submitted through the Alternative Tech portal. We have not developed a similar portal for third parties. Those submissions must be submitted to the leader of the measurement technology group, at the address below. Alternatively, these submissions can also be submitted as a PDF via email, and send those emails to johnson.stephan@epa.gov. If any part of your submission is considered CBI, please submit that portion of the information to OEQPS's CBI office. Electronic submissions must be transmitted directly to the CBI office email address at oeqpscbi@epa.gov, and you should include clear CBI markings and flagged to the attention of the leader of the measurement technology group. EPA does not have a defined review timeline for third-party certification. However, any combined technology review with a third-party certification will be performed at the same time, and that review process should be no more than 270 days, which matches the requirement the EPA has for reviewing technology reviews. For those entities that seek only third-party certification using an already approved technology, the goal is to have those reviews finished within 60 days. Our longest review time is associated with the technology. So as we start to discuss third parties, we should be able to move much quicker. EPA will post all third-party certifications at the link below. This is the link to our third-party certification site. That site is currently under construction. However, I would ask for you to come to it next week, and we'll have a fair amount of information included on that site from this webinar and from sections of the rule. Next slide, please. Once a third party has been certified, they'll receive a notifier ID and gain access to the Supermitter portal. At that time, they're subject to records management requirements in the rule. Also, all third parties should be aware of the revocation process in the event that they have found to submitted materially incorrect data to the EPA. Next slide, please. To put a little bit more detail up to that, certified third parties will be provided a unique notifier ID by the EPA and gain access to the Supermitter portal, which can be found at www.epa.gov/compliance/Supermitter. The third party may submit information to that portal as soon as 15 days after receiving a certification. The 15-day cool-off period is to allow the owner-operators to prepare for the Supermitter notifications coming in from a new third party and for EPA to adapt its systems to take data from that notifier. Submissions provided by the third party must be complete and consistent with the required fields identified in the rules. Third parties should also submit attribution of the Supermitter event if available. As part of the submission, the certifying official must also sign and date an attestation statement that they have been approved to be a notifier under the Supermitter program and that the emission detection information included in this notification was collected and interpreted as described in this notification. Also, they must sign a statement that says, based on my professional knowledge and experience and inquiry of personnel involved in the collection and analysis of this data, the certification submitted herein is true, accurate, and complete. Additionally, third parties are responsible for maintaining records of all surveys conducted under this program made at their behest, and records of any notification provided to the EPA and any other underlying information of these notifications not provided to the portal, as well as any records used for identifying the owner-operator of a site. Next slide. A third-party certification is not without limits. A third party may lose its ability to submit information to the Supermitter program if they have been found either to have made material changes to their procedures for identifying Supermitter without seeking recertification. The administrator finds that a certified third party has persistently submitted data with significant errors, and if a third party has engaged in illegal activity during the assessment of a Supermitter event, such as trespassing. Additionally, the administrator may revoke a certification if we receive a petition from an owner-operator to remove a third party from the list of approved parties. An owner-operator may in any owner-operator that has received more than 3 notices from meaningful or demonstrable errors of a Supermitter event at the same oil and gas facility from the same third party may submit that petition. However, such petitions are not to be used to dispute the methodologies that were approved. Next slide, please. And with that, we're finished with the first topic, and we'll now move on to the second topic area, which will focus on the Supermitter notification, owner-operator response, and the role the EPA plays in handling data. In the next 2 slides, we'll be looking at an example of how the Supermitter program is designed to work. Next slide, please. Setting the stage for the program, we have the 5 components of a Supermitter program. We have an oil and natural gas facility to the left. We have the owner and operator of that oil and natural gas facility. In this case, we have a combined technology provider / third party. We have the EPA in a centralized role. And finally, we have the public-facing super emitter portal. Next slide. Once again, the super emitter program, previous slide, please. Thank you. Once again, the super emitter program is designed to provide accurate and actionable information to the identified owner or operators of large emission events quickly so that owners and operators can investigate the underlying cause and take mitigation steps if necessary. This is an example of one of these large emission events occurring. Next slide, please. In this specific event, a satellite with a sensor that can identify methane has detected a signal associated with the plume from an oil and gas infrastructure. Information from the satellite is being acquired and processed by the technology provider / third party. They take that information from the sensor combined with other inputs on meteorological conditions and assumptions on how a plume disperses to allow them to identify the approximate rate of the emissions and the locations from which the emissions are coming from. Once again, once a detection has been made, a clock has started for the third party to submit information to the EPA. Before I move to the next slide, I want to reiterate that while we are showing a remote sensing satellite in this example, the super emitter program is not a satellite-only program, and any remote sensing platform could be used so long as it has the appropriate spatial resolution and the ability to detect a super emitter event. Next slide, please. The rule requires the third party to submit a notification of the super emitter event within 15 days of detection. A detection is considered the date and time in which the sensor took the measurement, or if multiple measurements are needed to verify an event, the detection is considered the date and time in which the sensor took the last measurement. When the third party knows the emissions are greater than 100 kilograms per hour of methane and they are confident of the location of the event, they will report the emissions through the super emitters portal. This report must include the date of detection, the location of the event in latitude and longitude, the identification of the technology used, the detection documentation of the event, for example, the use of imagery to depict a plume, an estimated emission rate of the event in kilograms per hour, and the owner-operator of the natural gas facility if available. As discussed previously, the submission must also include a signed attestation statement that identifies the report as true, accurate, and complete. Next slide, please. As EPA receives this information through the portal, we will quickly evaluate the notification for completeness and accuracy. When the notifications meet these conditions, EPA will assign a unique notification ID number and provide the notification to the identified owner-operator. EPA will then post the notification to the public side of the portal, except for the owner or operator attribution to avoid any misidentifications. There's no specified time frame for EPA to provide these notifications. However, if there's a reasonable degree of certainty of the accuracy of the notification, these notifications are expected to be sent to the owner as soon as receiving them from the third party. Once an owner-operator has received the notification, it starts their clock to start the investigation. Next slide, please. The owner and operator must initiate an investigation of an identified super emitter event within 5 days of receiving the notification and must report the results of these investigations to the EPA within 15 days of the notification. The investigations required in the rule include reviewing any maintenance and activities that may have caused the release. Example of this could be a blowdown or an unloading event. Examine the monitoring data from control devices to ensure proper operation. Review any fugitive emission surveys that may have been conducted from the date of the detection to the investigation date. Evaluate any data from any continuous alternative technology systems in operation at that time. And if no emissions have been identified through those investigations, the owner or operator must screen the entire well site, centralized production facility, or compressor station with either OGI, Method 21, or conduct a periodic screening using an approved alternative test method. Next slide, please. The owner or operator have 15 days to report back to the EPA through the SuperEmitter portal after receiving the notification. The report will depend on will depend on the findings of the investigations, and at a minimum will consist of the confirmation of the owner. If you are the owner, you must report the general description of the facility and whether the equipment of that site is subject to an NSPS rule and eventually to an emission guideline rule. If you are the owner or operator of a site and unable to identify an emission event, you would then report a confirmation that all possible investigations have been conducted. And if you are the owner or operator and you can identify the source, you would report the ID of the source, the applicability of the source, and the date at which the event ended. And like with a third party, there is an attestation statement that all information submitted through the portal is true and accurate. While not on this slide, if an event is ongoing at the time of the report, you are also required to develop a plan to mitigate the event and then report back through the portal when the emission event has ended. Next slide, please. EPA will review the report and update the public-facing portal with the owner-operator report and update with the attribution of the site upon confirmation. Next slide, please. As a last step, a third party will be allowed to update their initially reported emission event. EPA recognizes that it's difficult to provide a reasonable, accurate mass emission rates within 15 days of detection. And while this updated information has no impact on the owner-operator, the updated emission rate provides value in understanding the emission profile of these events. Next slide, please. This is the end of the second part of the webinar. The next topic is a presentation on the SuperEmitter portal. I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Margaret McCauley, with our Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance to walk you through this process. Thank you for listening to my part of the presentation. And again, thank you for joining us. Margaret, take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to just do a little wave and then I will take myself off video so we can focus on the slides. So next slide, please. I'm Margaret McCauley, and I'm helping manage the team building the data infrastructure for the Methane SuperEmitter program. I'm going to take you through another illustration of the process for what happens when data is submitted, reinforcing the blue and green slides that Ned just showed, providing a sense of how the steps of the rule will appear when the third-party notifiers and owners and operators interact with our data system. So the data process starts when a third-party notifier submits data. A little later in this presentation, I will show screenshots of the form the third-party notifier will use. Once it is signed and certified, the blue arrow, the EPA reviews the submission for completeness and accuracy. Next slide. If the submission fails review, EPA will send an email to the notifier, and that is the end of the process. Notifiers, as mentioned by Ned, will be able to revise, but my personal expectation is that they will have given us their best information the first time, and revisions will be a negligible part of this. Next slide. If an event notification passes the review for completeness and accuracy, 2, and eventually 3, things will happen as simultaneously as possible. The data, without owner-operator attribution, will be posted to the Methane SuperEmitter Program Data Explorer. That's a public website. I will show some screenshots of that Data Explorer at the end of my portion of the presentation. As part of the box marked on the screen as Review for Completeness and Accuracy, EPA will review whether this specific emission has been previously reported. If it has been previously reported, that will be noted on the record that is visible in the Data Explorer. In that instance, no notification for this specific event report will be sent to the owner-operator, as they will already have been notified in a previous report. If this report is not classified as an emission event that has been previously reported, and the third-party notifier has provided an attribution that passes the completeness and accuracy review, EPA will send an email to that owner or operator with the event notification data. We expect there will be questions about this step, and we will do our best to answer them. But I do want to point out that this step is something of a collaboration between the entities. We are building an option for owners and operators to bulk upload contact information for their facilities into their accounts in our Methane Super Emitter Program database. We encourage owners and operators to keep their accounts up to date so that we can provide emission event notifications to the correct person as quickly as possible. Now for the third prong of that blue arrow on screen, soon after the Methane Super Emitter Program opens for data, we will also have some features similar to the echo.gov features in EPA's Enforcement and Compliance History Online tool for government officials. I expect that portion of the system to be ready by Thanksgiving, along with the tool to allow anyone, including the public, to sign up to get informed of an event in the geographic area they have selected. Currently, we've heard that both zip code and county are useful geographic delimiters. If you have strong feelings about what data fields for public notifications are useful, feel free to let us know your preferences. Next slide. The dotted line indicates the steps for the owner or operator, and that area will get denser over the next few slides. Next slide. There will be a series of questions starting with, are you the owner or operator of an oil and gas facility within 50 meters of the plume source? If the answer to that is yes, the next question is, do you claim a demonstrable error in the notification? The exact sequence of questions will be determined by the answers. So a smart form. I'll be showing some screenshots of the owner-operator form starting 12 slides from now. Next slide. So you can see further branching here in response to possible answers about the source of emission. Next slide. And some further possibilities. And next slide. If an emission is ongoing, the owner or operator will update the response form until the emission is ended, as described in the rule. Next slide. So now I'm going to show you some screenshots of the form that the third-party notifiers will use to submit event data. Please note that these are closer to what a paper form would look like than what will show up in our system. As I note on the slides, we have submitted this form to the Office of Management and Budget for review, approval, and official form numbering. So it is possible there will be changes, although we do not anticipate much of any. You can see here that the top three fields are gray, indicating auto-populating. Only entities approved by EPA will have accounts and access to this form. So by logging into the account, the entity name and program ID number will be known and not editable. The notification report ID for the specific event report is issued by the system during this portion of the process. Next slide. Here's the first data entry slide. As you can see, we have an asterisk by the end date of detection/survey, indicating that that field is required. Similarly with latitude and longitude. Next slide. If it is clear what the source is, yes. If it is clear what the source is and there's identifier information available in a public database, then the third-party notifier will provide one of the identification numbers in the top fields, which will fill out the name of the associated owner-operator. Thus, the owner-operator field will be grayed out, meaning not editable, unless the third-party notifier is using other source of identifying information in this part of the form. Next slide. A third-party notifier might be approved to use more than one detection technology. So in this section, they tell us which technology this event was detected by and provide an image of the plume. Next slide. This is continued from the previous slide and is additional information that may be provided. Next slide. This is the end of that same section and has required information on the rate and the uncertainty. If the notifier knows the event has been previously reported, they can tell us that here. As I mentioned earlier, EPA will be collating reports should there be multiple for the same event. EPA's collation will include relevant reports, even if they are not mentioned in this field by a third-party notifier. Next slide. This section is for event metadata, so there is a copy of any data that the third party used in their calculation. Next slide. We built a little space here in additional optional additions to allow for learning. And finally, there is the attestation and signature. Next slide. Now I'm going to click through screenshots of the owner-operator response form. It is also under review by Office of Management and Budget. I apologize that this one is a little blurry. Once again, the system has assigned the report ID number, so that field is grayed out. And the questions that will appear to the person filling out the form will vary depending on their answers. Next slide. Here is a place to submit evidence of demonstrable error, should that be relevant. Next slide. Then we get into some of the information regarding what equipment is at the identified latitude and longitude. Is there a facility affected under Quad OC? Next slide. Here are the required investigation steps and the certification checkbox for that. I'll pause a little, because I know I'm going pretty fast. Next slide. What is the source and is it regulated? And as a reminder, whether these questions show up depend on the answers to the previous ones. Next slide. Here is where potential updates to the owner or operator response form for the end of the event are. Next slide. And finally, the attestation statement for signing the form. There are 15 different versions of this, depending on what the form entries above were. Next slide. Here's a mock-up of the public portal, the Data Explorer. It will have this map area where, once we start getting data, a user can mouse over an event symbol. There will be a pop-up showing both the data for a particular event and if that event is one of multiple at that location. In addition to the map area, next slide, there are searchable data fields. The ones on the screen right now may not be exactly what will be in the final release. We are in active development on this aspect of the interface. The rule requires us to post both the event notification and the owner-operator response, so those will be viewable. If there's a searchable data field you particularly want to see, let us know. Next slide. That was a lot of granular detail. The context is up on the website, and we have a few more user-oriented web pages in the EPA approval queue as well. Next slide. And that concludes the formal presentation. Now we will answer some of the questions that were previously submitted when registering for the webinar.
Thank you, Margaret. Thanks for your presentation. At this time, I'm going to ask Dave Nash, Hannah Halliday, and Aaron Margolis to join me on camera to go through a number of questions that have been submitted. All right, so as I said, we appreciate those that submitted questions. We were unable to address all the questions that we received prior to prior to this webinar. However, we are trying to cover a significant chunk of those questions that we received. I also noticed in the Q&A that we've received additional questions, and I recommend those who want to continue to provide questions to us to please submit it through the Q&A function. All right, so we've got a few questions. The first question is for Hannah Halliday from OQPS. The question is Earth surface mineral dust source, or EMIT, satellite a valid source of data for reporting super-emitter events?
Yes, but we note that any report submitted to the EPA methane super-emitter portal must come from an approved technology. For those entities that are using satellite data retrieval process, the onus is on the third party to confirm any increased methane concentrations identified from sensors such as EMIT, that those are from an oil and gas facility, that facility can be properly identified, and that the mass emission rate is greater than 100 kilograms per hour.
Thank you, Hannah. This next question is for Dave Nash, and it's still on the EMIT subject. Since it takes several days, if EMIT is used, can we still use the source? Sorry, I'm going to reread this question again. Since it takes several days to process EMIT data, can we still use this as a source of notification of super-emitter events, or is EPA interpreting the date of detection as the date of occurrence of the emission event?
So the date of detection is the day in which the remote sensing technology surveys, multiple surveys were required to detect the super-emitter event. The date of detection is the date of the final survey. So the intent of the regulations is to provide accurate and actionable data to the owner or operator without delay, to assist them in identifying these large emission events, to inform repairs and or to aid them in investigating the underlying cause or causes.
Thank you, Dave. This next question is also for you. Does a third party need to have a licensed professional engineer on staff as a certifying official?
No, we only require a CV of the certifying official or officials that details their work history, education, skill set, and training for evaluating the results of the technologies that will be used to identify super-emitter events. The key step is that certifying officials have been sufficiently trained in the measurement approaches used to ensure the accuracy of the data submitted to the agency. So EPA will review the CVs and the accompanying documentation as part of the certification of the third party.
Thank you, Dave. This next question is for Hannah Halliday. The NSPS states all approved third-party notifiers shall be posted on EPA's website at www.epa/EMC third-party certifications, but that link is currently inactive. When does EPA anticipate authorizing third-party notifiers?
The EPA is now accepting applications for certifying third parties. Once third-party notifiers have been approved, those entities will be posted to that webpage. Additionally, this site will be updated in the future with additional information, including a copy of the slides from this presentation, webinar, a video of this webinar, and a plain language document describing the third-party certification process.
Thank you, Hannah. This next question is also for you. Do technologies used for detection under the super-emitter program first have to be approved by the EPA through the alternative monitoring technology requirements?
Yes, any technology applying for approval through the EPA for the super-emitters program will need to follow the submission guidelines for the methane alternative test method approvals. And we have a guideline document detailing the submission requirements available for any applicants. Technologies that are aimed for the super-emitters program will mark themselves as super-emitter program under the applicability section. The portal can be found at methane.app.cloud.gov, and we will add that link either to the chat, or if not to the chat, then it will be sent out to the group after the end of this.
Thank you. And Hannah, I got one more for you. How does the EPA intend to address the uncertainties and confidence bounds of the quantification of these technologies? For example, many papers have indicated that the quantifications of measurements from aerial technologies can have significant plus or minuses in their readings.
Sure. So as part of the technology review, candidate technologies must detail how errors are calculated and propagated. The application documents for approved technologies are available to the public. While quantification uncertainties are required for submission, the SuperMeter program is a detection-based program that is focused on large events that are quantified above the 100 kilogram per hour minimum leak rate for the SuperMeter events.
Thank you, Hannah. All right, this next question is for Dave. What is the process if you are notified of an event and you find out that it's a neighboring source that is not under your ownership? Do you just indicate that in your response?
So the first step is to confirm whether or not you have a facility within 50 meters of the lat long. If you don't respond to the notification with that information and no further response is needed, if you're the owner and operator of a facility within 50 meters of the lat long, you must conduct all applicable searches on their facilities. If you don't find the source of the SuperMeter event, you would indicate that in your report. There's no requirement to identify a neighboring facility not under your ownership.
Thank you, Dave. This next question is for Aaron. What contact will EPA utilize to notify a company, and where does that contact come from?
EPA plans to provide a method for oil and gas companies to provide contact information for each of their facilities. If no such information is provided by the company, EPA plans to use publicly available data, such as state contact lists and permits, commercially available data, and contacts who have previously filed on behalf of the facilities.
Thank you, Aaron. This next question is also for you. Will the SuperMeter notifications come in the standard format, regardless of who provides the original monitoring notice? For instance, can we expect the notice to include lat long of the highest area of concentration, date and time in standard format, etc.? Further, will these be downloadable in CSV or XLS format?
EPA plans to provide notifications in a standard format via email, including all of the data about the emission submitted by the notifier, which will be in the same place on every email. This data will include the identified facility, last day of detection, image, and image description. It may also include end time of detection, and for non-instantaneous detections, the start date of detection and start time of detection. It may also include quarter coordinates for the image and any metadata used by the third party in calculating the quantity.
Thank you, Aaron, for that excellent response. This next question is for Dave Nash. Some commercial satellite providers have said that they will not register with EPA's SuperMeter program, but plan to publicly release any data they collect without first notifying the purported owner of the facility. Without any standardization of the data and verification of the facility, the data will not be comparative and can be very misleading. Are there any steps that EPA can take to prevent this from happening?
So EPA is not responsible for how the commercial satellite providers plan to use the data that they collect and release on the moon, which have no relation to activities conducted as part of the SuperMeter program.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. The next question is for Aaron. Can SuperMeter notifications be submitted to the EPA if they're not tied to well sites, centralized production facilities, natural gas processing, or compressor stations?
Third-party notifications of SuperMeter events may be submitted to the EPA via the SuperMeter program portal, even if the notification does not attribute the event to a specific oil and gas system. However, EPA will only send a SuperMeter program notification to an owner-operator if the EPA has confirmed to a reasonable degree of certainty that the event occurred at an oil and natural gas facility that is subject to the SuperMeter program.
Thank you, Aaron. This next question is for Hannah. Will applicants become certified? I'm sorry, I got to reread this question again. Will applicants that become certified third parties notifiers become publicly visible during review in some manner that the alternative test method applications become visible?
So the EPA intends to be transparent with the third-party certifications as we are with the technology applications. While we have not yet developed a portal system for the third parties at this time, the EPA will provide information about those third parties as we approve those certifications. Again, at that epa.gov/emc/third-party certifications website. Entities interested in applying for a third-party certification in the near term should email the Methane Alternative Test Method Review Team at methaneatm@epa.gov. Again, we'll have those emails distributed to the list here.
Thank you very much, Hannah. This next one is also for you. Does the application use case of an alternative test method need to be specified as for the SuperMeter program as opposed to, say, broadly applicable in order to be used for the other programs?
Yes. During the application process for candidate technology, that technology would select SuperMeter program as the intended applicability, not broadly applicable, and that will divert it appropriately to the SuperMeter reviews.
Thank you, Hannah. This next question is for Aaron. Once the EPA receives a SuperMeter notification, do they have to check that notification for completeness and submit that notification to an operator within a set time frame?
EPA will check the notification for completeness and confirm its accuracy to a reasonable degree of certainty. The portal will allow EPA to quickly review incoming data for accuracy and completeness, allowing for timely notification of verified data to owner or operator.
Thanks, Aaron. This next question is for Dave. Do states need to include the SuperMeter program in their regulations that make up a state plan pursuant to EPA's emission guidelines? If so, what elements need to be included in the state regulation? Just the steps that operators need to follow after they've received the notification from EPA pursuant to the SuperMeter program.
This is a great question. It speaks more broadly to the overall implementation of the rule. I can't answer the question at this time, but we received it in multiple venues and are working towards a more formal agency response.
Thanks again, Dave. This next question is also for you. If a company gets certified to report leaks to the EPA under the SuperMeter program, are they required to do so? My question is really thinking about the capacity to submit under, I'm sorry, I'm going to rephrase this question. What they're really concerned about the capacity of using satellite information for the SuperMeter program as opposed to other purposes.
Okay, so there's no requirement that a solution provider or a third party report data as part of the SuperMeter program. The key piece of a third party notifier system is allowing the notifier to have final say over their selection of events that are submitted to the SuperMeter program, encouraging notifiers to focus on their most certain events.
That's terrific, Dave. Thank you for that. We're getting to our last few questions. Can satellite imagery be used to validate prior known date with an emission? For example, on this, let's say satellite A sees a large emission event on June 20th and reports it to a company. If that company has data from satellite company B that shows that there was no leak on June 15th, can June 15th be the date of the last known leak and going back to a field instead of going back to a field LDAR survey or other similar date?
So for the purposes of the SuperMeter program, there's no requirement to determine the length of the emission event. Note, for questions like this that are related to the recent Subpart W amendments, we encourage reaching out to ghgreporting@epa.gov.
Thanks again, Hannah. Our final question is for Dave Nash. What is the difference between EPA's SuperMeter database and other large similar methane event data portals such as NASA's EMIT data?
EPA's SuperMeter program database and public portal will show where certified third parties have detected SuperMeter events as defined in the EPA's oil and natural gas regulations. So the difference between EPA's portal and others is that the data in EPA's database will be populated by SuperMeter event notifications submitted by third parties certified by the EPA for purposes defined in the Quadro rules. Specifically, information provided to EPA's portal could lead to EPA notifying an owner-operator of a SuperMeter event at the facility, which would then trigger an obligation for an owner-operator to investigate the cause of a super emitter event. While there may be some overlap with respect to the data publication between the EPA's portal and others, for the purposes of the super emitter program specifically, an owner or operator is not obligated to act on that information from outside the EPA.
All right. Thank you, Dave. Thanks for the responses. And with that, that is the last of the questions that we'll be responding to. We appreciate those questions that have been submitted through the question and answer portal. EPA will review those and respond back to in time. I want to thank you for joining us. I do want to remind everybody that we will be making the slides available hopefully within the coming weeks, and this video of the webinar available on our third-party certification site later on. We'll also be following up an email to the participants with the links mentioned in today's webinar. We apologize for not having a chat portion to put those into, but please look out for an email with the links mentioned in today's webinar. Thanks again for joining us, and take care.